Hello, I'm Jane. Welcome to Artisan Stitch. This video is another in my dressmaking techniques series, and it's to show you how to put on a waistband to either a skirt or trousers. So there we go, a little attached roll-on straight waistband. First you have your skirt section. So what we've done is obviously stay stitched, darts, and those are all in separate videos, which I'll put a link to in the description. I've inserted the zip, stitched the side seams. So now we are ready for the waistband. So the waistband I prepared by adding the interfacing. See, I've got the notches. I like to cut my notches as little peaks, and these match to the notches on the skirt section itself. I've also applied an interfacing. This is an ultralight one. It's not stiffened the fabric. We don't want it to be too stiff. It's just giving it some extra strength. And I've also marked the waistband with the points from the pattern. So what you'll have is a dot at each end of the waistband. This one will be further in than at the other end. This is to allow for the underlap. And you will also have small dots to mark the points where the waistband matches the side seams of the skirt. And if you have marked all your dots correctly, it makes putting on the waistband much easier. So first thing I'm going to do is take this over to the iron, press under the seam allowance and trim the waistband. I'm going to use one of my favourite sewing gadgets, a little piece of cereal box card marked with my distances. So I'm going to use 1.5 centimetres so I can just pull the fabric over. Now this is the unnotched edge I'm pressing in. This is the notched edge there. Just pressing in the amount of the seam allowance. In case you've wondered, this waistband looks a bit small. Yes, it wouldn't fit me. This is my miniature sample size I'm working on today. And there we go, that's it done. Now trimming the seam allowance. The patterns usually say 6mm or 1/4 inch. I'm just taking it back. Yeah, cutting about half of it off, just to reduce bulk once the skirt is finished. And this process is known as grading or layering your seams. And the aim is to make sure that you don't have too many layers of fabric all coming to the same point, which causes bulk in a garment. Right, now the reason I think it tells you to press over first then trim and not to press over the small amount is it's actually easier to fold over and press a larger distance than it is a small one. This would be quite fiddly to try and press. I'm now going to attach the waistband to the skirt. So with the right sides together, I've opened the zip of the skirt. This is a concealed zip, but the method is the same whether you've used a standard zip. So I'm going to take the centre position, I think, we'll start with. Always a good place to start. I'm going to match my centre front notches, and I like to pin there. I'm going to work my way around to the sides. So the darts obviously pressed into the centre front. So I'm just going to harpoons today, not pins. There we go. I like to pin all my side seams and things together. Now here we have the dot which I transferred from the pattern, and that very nicely lines up with the side seam position. And you'll notice I have overlocked my side seams and trimmed the excess seam allowance off. Seams are pressed to the back skirt. And here we have 2 darts and notches lining up very neatly again. Again, I like to I like to pin all these little intervals in place. So when it comes to the zip, I'm going to just pull it in. So you notice I'm not allowing the zip tape to stick out beyond the skirt. So if you do that, you will see the zip when you're wearing your garment. So I'm going to just roll it round so there's a little edge of fabric. And again, that edge should line up with the dot you've placed on the waistband. So you see that paying attention to the markings on your pattern is well worth taking the time to do. Then work round the next side to the side seam. Again, I can just check that my dot aligns with the side seam. Okay, I'll pin that side seam in place and working around to the second set of back darts. I'm slightly out here for some reason. Let's see, let's move this along. Some garment patterns require you to ease a little bit of the waistband on, so just make sure that I haven't stretched it too much. Just allow a little bit more waistband, and I can distribute that fullness evenly as I'm sewing. There we go. So really see why these markings are important. Then again at the other end, I'm just going to roll that in a little bit so we have an edge. And the dot here corresponds with the end position. Right, now we're ready for sew. So you can sew from the waistband side. I prefer to sew from this side, and then I can watch what all these bits are doing, and I can make sure that the presser foot doesn't push this over, stitch it down the wrong way. I can make sure that my darts are still pointing to the centre front, my side seams are pointing to the back. Very nice. So I'm going to start on the zip, reverse into the waistband, then work my way right round to the other end. Right, I'm going to start positioning my needle over the zip. So I'm sewing 15mm down from the raw edge of the fabric. Just tuck my thread under there. Right. Then that means I can get my needle in, get in some reverse stitches to anchor the edge of the zip into the waistband, and then I can carry on coming straight forward. You'll see that as the stitching is done about 12 or 13mm from the edge, the stitching is actually going to cover that up, so you won't see it once the skirt is complete. but you don't need to take the waistband, the stay stitching out. And that was me hitting a pin there. So the reason I put my pins in perpendicular to the edge of the fabric is so I can move them before I reach them. But putting the pins in that way helps hold your edges. Just making sure that dart is lying forward. The presser foot isn't going to push it backwards. Trying to maintain my 15mm seam allowance at all times. Again at the other end, just tucking that zip in. So you see the presser foot's pushing it forward, so I'm going to tuck it back in because I don't want that zip sticking out beyond the edge of the skirt. Right, and go 1 or 2 stitches into these, and then reverse. So that's my skirt stitched in all the way. There's no stay stitching going to be showing. I've secured the zip in at both ends, so I can clip my threads. You notice I'm using this beautiful bright pink today, so you can see clearly what I am doing. Right, and that's my waistband stitched in. So I'm going to go and give that a press now. So first of all, I'm just pressing over that stitching, again to meld the stitching and the fabric, or to set the seam, as seamstresses would say. And this has a big impact on the finished look of your garment. This is one of the things that helps it elevate it from homemade to handmade, couture, bespoke. Right, just right along. Right, now I'm going to press it again, pressing the seam allowances up towards the waistband. Again, to wriggle the fabric around. So just opening up that seam. And working in such a small scale is quite fiddly, but it will be easier on a full-size garment. Okay. So really what I'm making sure is I've opened that seam up completely. So you can see the difference between the pressed and the unpressed one. If I left that unpressed, carried on doing my waistband, it just doesn't look the same. You can do it from this side if you want to. So as long as you smooth it out, put a little bit of pressure to open that seam. Holding the seam allowances up towards the waistband. re-ironing the darts there as well. So I'm right to the end, and you see now, by rolling the zip round to the inside, there's no zip visible on the outside. That'll give a lovely finish. Once the zip is done up, you can't see it at all. It disappears into the seam. So I'm now going to layer these seams. We've got quite a bit of fabric bulk here, so I'm going to take out all these extra bits of fabric, trim this bit back. This is the skirt piece. I'm just going to trim this back to less than this depth here. So just finishing off the far end. So you notice I'm using my small stork shaped embroidery scissors with lovely long pointed ends, not my large fabric shears. Too much potential for damage with large shears. I'm also going to go back in and just nick out these little extra points. If this was a thick fabric, I would actually go in and take away another layer in there. Again, this is called layering or grading the seams, and it's just to make sure that the garment is as smooth as possible. Again, we can nick that bit off. And all these other darts. So I haven't trimmed the zip. I like to keep my zips intact because if for any reason you need to take the zip out and reinsert it, it's much easier if you still have the zip tape intact. So I'm quite happy with that. So I'm going to move on to the next stage. Right. Next I'm going to be finishing off the short ends of the waistband. So for this edge here, this should just be the seam allowance which is left. So we're going to fold the waistband round, bring this fold to the seam where the waistband joins the skirt. That fold there. Open that out, and you see there we have our little dot. So I'm going to pin across. So I've folded the waistband right sides together, so the waistband is going back round to the front of the skirt. And we're going to stitch that short end closed right up there, flush with the edge of the zip. Now we come to the other end. So this end's a bit more tricky. This is where we need to leave the underlap. So again, I'm going to fold waistband round. This folded edge goes towards the seam allowance. The seam. And again we have our little dot, but now we have this extra length. Now remember, you've trimmed a little piece off here, so these edges will not match, but it's the seam allowances that we're matching, or the seam line. Again, there we have our dot. So I'm going to pin through the dot, and that dot marks the point where your zip is. Now this one is going to get stitched down there, so again just within the seam allowance 1.5 centimetres, so let me mark that on. So we're going to come down there from the fold, down to the seam line, pivot round, come along there to match up with your previous stitching. And you can draw this on if you wish, it makes it easier. And we want needle to stop in there. So that's sealing off the end of this waistband. And if you machine stitch this, it stops you having to hand sew the ends, which is what I like about this technique. It's quite neat. Again, I've got my dots, so you want the stitching to match up. You'll be able to feel that with your finger, where that stitching is there. And that's the bit that we want to join up with. So I'm back at the machine. I'm going to finish the short ends. I'll do this very short end first. The idea is that we come up flush with the zip, so you have one continuous line. So I want to position my needle 2 or 3 stitches in front of the dot so that I can reverse back. And there we go. And then just continue straight down. I'm 1.5 centimetres away from the cut end. And reverse at the end. Now to the other end. This one is a bit more tricky. Out, but I'm just holding, let's see, reposition, make sure I pull everything into alignment. I need to do 1 or 2 more stitches to take it down to the corner where I can. Pivot and come down the straight, ending at that dot. So you notice I'm holding these 2 seam allowances out the way. I don't want those getting caught up in the waistband stitching. And you can clearly joining up with the previous stitching when you attach the waistband. There we go, so that's what you're looking for. Now, to again trim this corner off, because this is all going to end up inside the waistband, making it quite bulky. So we can take away some of this excess right in the corner, take that off. These are just thread snips that are actually not meant for cutting fabric, but they do quite a good job. And you can take a lot away, a little bit there. I'm just going to angle it down. Right, so now we're going to turn through. Now this is quite a narrow waistband, so it's fiddly. So just going to grab my bamboo skewer. Something with a blunt end, not very sharp scissors, or you'll poke your way right through. That may be something I would do by myself, but I'm not going to be shown on film, demonstrating my bad habits. There we go, so I'm just carefully easing the corner out. And if you don't think it's flat enough, you can just go back in and just push. And you've got reasonably square corners. Right, so now the other end. I'll take off some of this excess fabric. Don't want all that. Making sure that we don't have any more than one layer of fabric in the one place, which can create a lump and a ridge. So we're turning the waistband right to the right side. We can tuck that edge up. So now I'm going to go back to the iron and take this folded edge of the waistband and place it over the stitching. So you can see the 2 rows of stitching here. The top row is the stay stitching. The second row is the row holding the waistband to the skirt. And from the inside we want to hide that. So I'm going to pull it over. Right, so I've pressed the waistband over to cover the stitching on the inside, all the way along. So now working from the right side, start here. I'm going to take on the inside, pull this bit down, again just make sure it covers the stitching. From the right side, I'm going to pin just a millimetre or 2 away from that seam, and just make sure that you have caught the waistband in underneath, because we are going to do one of my favourite techniques called stitch in the ditch. Again, catching and back. So we are going to stitch on the front. You're not going to see it because we're going to be stitching right in there. This is like invisible top stitching. Obviously you could top stitch the waistband, actually on the waistband. It may not look that neat from the back. It may not look neat from the front. But if you're not confident about doing that, then hiding the stitching in the previous seam is a very good alternative. And I just think this gives a skirt, I think it's actually nicer than top stitching. It just gives it a really classy appearance. Very high end. Again, I'm just checking that as I pin, making sure that I'm catching the folded side of the waistband on the underneath, just right along to the other end. And that will make sure that when our stitching comes in, that we know we have definitely got it down. Now, I've been using this little bright pink thread throughout so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to start off doing my stitch in the ditch using the pink, but then I will stop the camera and continue with a matching thread just to show you that it is pretty invisible. In case you heard that, that's a fire alarm going off. They're just testing it, so no need to panic. Right, so I'm taking care to get my needle right in that groove. Now, because I have the centre position here, the needle position marked on the foot, that's going to make it quite easy to do. So that was some reverse stitching. Coming along, needles just right in the groove. Trying not to wobble and go onto the waistband where the stitching will be more visible. Also trying not to venture too far out into the skirt section. So just take it nice and slow. Again, every so often you can check underneath to make sure nothing has slipped out of place. Right, I'm going to stop now and I will change threads and finish the rest of the stitching and show you what it's like when it's done. Right, so there we have the beginning of the stitch in the ditch. You can see the pink threads in there, even though they are tucked right up into the seam. But then when I change to the blue matching thread, you actually don't see that at all, unless you're going up to stare at people with a magnifying glass. There we go. So that's stitch in the ditch. So that is your waistband done. There we go. All that remains is to add your button and buttonhole, or a skirt bar, or a hook and eye, and the hem, which I've already done a video on hems, but I will link that in the description as well. So there we go, how to make a skirt. Little miniature skirt, so cute.